Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Jessie Daniels, and I'm a full professor in sociology, and I also direct our master's program in Applied Digital Sociology. For those of you who may be new to digital sociology, we are an emerging subfield of sociology that, very simply put, looks at the difference the internet makes to patterns of human social behavior. And as you can all intuit, it makes a big difference. So we have lots to do. And the applied part of our program means that, a lot of times the insights from digital sociology are very applicable in industry and nonprofit world. And about 80% of our students in the master's program go on to industry or nonprofit jobs, and about 20% go on to PhD programs. And I'm very excited to be joined today by Eric Reeves, who is one of our recent graduates from the program. He was actually in our accelerated BA-MS program, which is a 5-year program where undergraduates can add a master's degree to their program of study. And he's going on, I'm just going to brag on Eric a little bit. He's going on to NYU to their PhD program in sociology in the fall after turning down several offers from places like Harvard and Berkeley. Anyway, so we're all very proud of Eric, and he's going to talk a little bit about what it was like being a student on this project. So the project at hand that I've been working on since January of 2022 is called Combating the Far Right in the Streets, Online, and Around the World. And that subtitle is really sort of the 3 buckets of intervention that we're looking at. And this is, I call it a large collaborative qualitative study. And the collaborative part has been that I have collaborated with students in the program since the beginning. And so I taught a class called Combating the Far Right that was in the spring of 22. And a lot of the students, including Eric, who were in that class, conducted interviews with people who are doing some version of pushing back against white supremacy and the far right, anywhere in the world. Could be online, could be in person, could be in the streets. And so we cast a very wide net at this early stage of doing the project. Our goal is to eventually get at least 150 interviews. And right now, we're at, I believe the last count is 81 or so interviews. And part of the reason that I wanted to be here today is to talk a little bit about the software that we used. Following John Pell's sort of confession about nerding out on lit reviews and sort of how you do those, my nerd or geek moment today will be about qualitative software. So as anyone knows who's tried to use any of these software products, Atlas TI, In Vivo, and there's another one that I'm forgetting the name of. Anyway, but they're all very challenging and the learning curve on them is super steep. And so I hesitated to use one of those with students because, in a 15-week semester, you have to be able to onboard people really quickly, and I wanted something that would do a lot of things. And similar to the project that was just described, almost all of these interviews initially were done via Zoom, so they were done remotely. So we needed a way to both do interviews, transcribe them, and code the interviews. So I'm going to share my screen briefly and tell you a little bit about the software that we use. Then I'm going to let Eric say a little bit about what it was like as a student using that, just like a couple of minutes. And then I'm delighted to see my friend and colleague Prayag and Narula from the West Coast, Hey Prayag, who actually developed this beautiful software, and he's going to talk about the software itself. So here I go, sharing my screen. When I log into the software called Hey Marvin, I have this folder here called CTFR, which is my acronym for Combating the Far Right. And you can see 78 files is where we are now. And each time we do an interview, it loads. I'm going to show you this one I did recently with a anti-racist activist in Kentucky, whose name is Beth Howard. And so the interview conducted on Zoom goes automatically to the software Hey Marvin, and then it does a rough transcript and does these tags or codes. I'm working with a student right now in the process of refining that code book And I'm going to stop sharing and just talk to y'all. So there's definitely a process of refining the codes that come out of it, but just in terms of doing the interview and then a machine learning or automatically generated transcript has been enormously helpful. Somebody put deduce in the chat. Yes, deduce is the other one. All of those standard qualitative packages have such a really steep learning curve that we didn't have that with this. So that's what I'm going to say. And then I'm going to shoot over to Eric and let him say a little bit about it. And then we'll popcorn to Prayag.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Professor Daniels mentioned, my name is Eric Reeves. I recently completed the dual BA MS Sociology and Applied Digital Sociology program here at Hunter. I was also a Mellon Mays undergraduate fellow. So I was doing a lot of research, especially over the last couple of years. I did a lot of research here at Hunter. And next semester I will be starting my PhD at NYU, because what better place to be a graduate student than New York City? I mean, certainly I think it was a lot better than my other options in terms of culture and community. Most of my research is qualitative. I especially conduct a lot of, interviews and content analyses. My research interests broadly include, crime and criminal punishment, social control, abolition, transformative justice. Over the past few years, I've explored a number of public health issues, ranging from prison overcrowding to police brutality. I'm currently working on 2 papers. The first explores the intersection of social policy and health disparities in California state prisons. And for that paper, I used deduce, actually, which, as Professor Daniels mentioned, is feels very outdated. It's very clunky. The coding just took forever. And I often found that if I didn't save frequently enough, then a lot of my codes would just disappear. And so it took me way more time to get to analyzing the data than it should have. But, fortunately, since I had the privilege of working with Professor Daniels on this Combating the Far Right project, looking at far right militancy in law enforcement, infiltrations of far right extremists in law enforcement, I was introduced to Marvin, which is just so much more advanced and intelligent. Very well done, Prayag, on this one. Being able to conduct interviews on Zoom, which were automatically transcribed, saved so much time on having to go in there and maybe just tweak a few things, but for the most part, it really did capture the dialogue. And we were able to code them very quickly. And I think what actually makes Marvin so much better than these other qualitative softwares out there is it's also just designed for teams, so it's collaborative. I could identify the codes, the through lines and themes in my research that was being conducted by other members of the team. So I think it really allows you to see how expansive these issues are. And so I think that is something that I would definitely encourage me to use Marvin more, because I think that a lot of this qualitative research we do is collaborative. I also think that being able to record the interviews and have them all in one hub did help. I was able to present some of this research at a conference last year, and I was able to use some of the videos from that conference or from those interviews in the presentation. So just being able to use it in the moment, but also use those interviews later on is super helpful. Looking ahead, I think I'll probably continue to use Marvin. I'll continue to do qualitative research. I will be next semester. I'll be joining NYU's Prison Education Program Research Lab, which is led by Professor Lynn Haney, and that is a collaboration between faculty and graduate students and formerly incarcerated undergraduates who are exploring a range of issues within the criminal legal system. So I look forward to using Marvin or introducing them to Marvin if they're not already using it. I'm sure that you are probably have had those conversations, Prayag, but if not, I would look forward to doing it. So here if you guys have any questions, and thanks for having me.
I'll try not to take too much of your time. I'm just here to talk a little bit about Marvin, just a little bit about kind of my background, the story behind Marvin, which we don't usually get to tell. So the idea here is just to give you a little bit of a taste of how Marvin works. We had a question around why the name Marvin. So Marvin is a qualitative data analysis tool. And the story behind Marvin is essentially a lot of it a story of myself. I'm a researcher by training, actually came to Asian American, came to the US to learn first qualitative research and then taught qualitative research at UC Berkeley. And I was very frustrated with the tooling available. It seemed like it was going back into the past. And I used some QDAs before. I did some research at University of Helsinki or HIIT. The process seemed so clunky. It seemed like going back in time, 15 years when I was using those tools. So when I got a chance to do something new, that was the problem that I thought was, something that was near and dear to me, something that I had felt personally. And I've been blown away by the response we've gotten. Response both. So we're used by both academia as well as industry. Various different schools and research institutes across the country. Various different companies. Small and large across the world. It feels like, if you have felt the pain of qualitative coding, I am here to tell you I'm a living proof that you're not the only one. And people around the world, just the response we've gotten has been kind of validating in terms of that there is definitely was a lack of tooling. So this is our attempt at making it easy for researchers to do qualitative research. One of my real frustration with industry specifically, but even with academia, is a lot of times it feels like as qualitative researchers we are fighting for the validity of qualitative methods, and then we are fighting with our toolkit that doesn't actually help us provide that kind of help us prove that validity. It's frustrating that we have to keep proving it. And even today we have, a lot of research papers would have like, what are qualitative methods? And then, our tools are fighting against us to kind of, in helping us make that case. So, this is our attempt at one of kind of our rallying cry as a company is qualitative methods are valid research. It's scientific research. It's not anecdotal. It's a validated, it's a valid method of scientific research, and we can make it easy for people to use qualitative research. There'll be a lot more people using it, and it'll my hope is in 10 years time, no research papers would have to talk about qualitative methods, and it'll all be understood in the industry that that's a right. It's a scientific method. That's our attempt. That's our kind of overarching goal. And so to do that, the research needs to be collaborative. It needs to be easy. It needs to be fast. I know in certain, it's some part in research you have a lot of time, but other times you don't. So we are, trying to make it easy, trying to make teams do it collaboratively, but also make it fast. So what we are is an online user-friendly QDA software that works with your existing tools, right? So you mentioned Zoom has been mentioned. We have really deep integration with Zoom. If you're using Teams, we have deep integration with Teams. If you're using, Google Meet, we work with that. If you're using Qualtrics, we work with that. Whatever tools that you're using today, our guiding principle is you should not have to learn new tools for you to use QDAs. QDAs should work. We are a consumer of the data, and we should make it easy for everyone to pull their data in to Marvin for coding and other purposes. We also very much so before we embarked on building this software, we like good researchers, we went and did our own research and talked to a lot of researchers, or qualitative researchers, both in academia and industry. And one of the things that we were very interested in the coding process, right? Because that's really a crux of qual research. And one of the things we saw was people were taking down notes when they were doing research, and then those notes were then being used to code the data. Essentially, they'll take notes in one document and then copy paste those notes into the QDA tool. So one of the big revelations for us, why can't we just integrate that process so you can do a lot of coding in just real time using the notes? And you won't be able to get deep coding done, but you'll be able to at least get started on the coding process. I remember my qualitative research class, and my professor told me you should spend 3 hours for every hour, 3 hours coding a 1 hour interview at least. And I felt wrong then, and I'll be honest, feels wrong now. That process needs to be a lot shorter. So we are trying to make sure that process is integrated into your note taking, so you don't have to spend 3 times more. If you have to do 3 times more, spend 3 times more time coding the data than collecting, then you'll just end up collecting less data than you should. So so we definitely need to shorten that process. And then as with everything, I am both a user and a critique of modern AI. So we use a lot of AI systems in Marvin, and we're trying to use more and more to make sure that the process is fast, but at the same time, it's also giving researchers the control. So ultimately, we are a modern multiplayer, multi-user QDA. With that, I'm ready to show you how this whole process works. As I mentioned, this is Marvin, and Marvin is a QDA. There are a bunch of you can collect any kind of qualitative data. I think so far you've mostly seen interviews, and that's obviously 90% of our job as qual researchers. But it doesn't need to be. So if I go into a project, you can see all of these videos, but there's also secondary research or lit review research that you've done that also can go into Marvin, can be tagged, surveys, any kind of unstructured qualitative data can go into Marvin and can be tagged and coded pretty quickly. Obviously, as qual researchers, we spend probably most of our time coding just interviews or video sessions. And to do that, we integrate directly into the Zooms of the world, the Teams of the world, the Google Meets, or whatever platform you're using. And our philosophy is that note-taking and coding should be integrated. They should kind of work together. So especially in the world of remote, in the world of remote research, there is no reason why there should be, your note should be separate, your coding annotation should be separate. So to do that, we integrate directly into a Zoom platform or in this case, for this example, I've actually launched a Google Meet meeting. And essentially the system has said, oh, you're in a Google Meet meeting. Would you like to take notes? And when I click on it, essentially, opens up this note-taking app. Okay. And this works like any other note-taking app. This is a note. When I type note, any of my colleagues that are on this, they can see my note. I can see their note. Works like, kind of taking notes together on a Google Doc. Except that these notes are time-stamped. Okay. So essentially, when you're going back to these notes, you're not just going back to a static document. You're going back to those notes being attached to your interview and the transcript based on those timestamps. Okay. So essentially, what we are trying to do is, kickstart the coding process right from the note-taking process directly. Okay. So essentially, because while you're taking notes, you're already adding context to the conversation. We are just making that context available to you. Now you can start to actually do a lot more because now we don't have to verbatim type out what the participant said when we were taking these notes, because that's all attached to the note directly. We can actually use this time to maybe do some light coding. right? And so one of the ways you could do that is using your interview discussion guide. So if you're using a discussion guide, you can tag those discussion questions directly into the interface. So you can click on a question and it'll say, all right, well, this point, this was a question asked. The system might even start recommending some codes based on the existing codes you've used, or you can bring out your code book and tag, questions from codes from the code book, or what we call labels. And then instead of taking notes, you can just leave the whole system, the whole notes blank. And what that would do is it'll basically say, AI, why don't you summarize that part of the conversation for me? Because that's essentially what notes are, while I spend my time doing early coding work on this data, so that when I go back, I have a large part of the coding done in real time while I'm taking notes, right? So essentially, it's a way to shortcut your coding and then get some help while you're note taking, right? So there's an AI note taker built into this note taking app, and you don't have to do any coding if you don't have to do any note taking if you're the only one. For example, if you want to focus on the participant, you can just have your finger on the return key. Anytime something important happens, press return, and the AI will just take notes for you. So when you go back, your notes are already created by AI, but you can always code data afterwards. You can always just highlight any part of the conversation. Coding is as simple as adding notes on a Google Doc. That's why the students were able, they're so used to Google Docs. That's what the observation was, so used to Google Docs that they could just highlight and just bring out the code book right here, bring out a question right here. So the coding process is just taking notes. If you want to, you can do a lot more coding here, or if you want to do coding afterwards, you can just highlight any part like you would on a Google Doc, and it'll open up the coding interface. Select your labels from the code book, from the label interface, add your questions directly from here, take some notes, and it's as easy as just highlighting, right? And this works across the board. This works for if you're doing if you're doing a lit review and you have a bunch of research papers, highlighting those, just really easy. Just highlight, code, label. Same thing with surveys. You can import your surveys, your survey data, just import your survey data, start coding it right here. So the lot of inspiration is from how easy it is to add comments onto a Google Doc or Office 365 document. That's what it is, except that it helps you even kickstart the coding process very quickly before you even have the recordings available. There's also a bunch of other AI features. AI always summarizes your interview for you, so you can always go and look at the summary. And the analysis is also, pretty straightforward. So obviously, as we know, the analysis of our, synthesis analysis is a cyclical process between working with our codes and working with our data. They're both kind of available to you on Marvin in these two interfaces, right? So when you say codes, we call them labels, and our labels are designed to they're designed around the more grounded theory principles, where the idea is that you should be able to group together labels and document labels and start to kind of create those relationships between different labels, right? And for us, again, we want you focusing on the creation and the story and what the labels are telling you or those codes are telling you, rather than spending time kind of finagling. So it's based on kind of quick drag and drop principles to build out this code book very quickly. Okay. As you build out this code book, on the analyze page, you can start to see patterns that are emerging. First, you can just look at them in a more kind of, the frequency of these labels used. So you can say, all right, well, here is this is the frequency chart of all of the parent labels. But what's really interesting is if I start to, so we can say challenges have come up a lot and product features have come up a lot. But because challenges has, all these sub challenges, I can just double click. It'll show me all of the sub challenges in the distribution. You can even go deeper and say, all right, this is all of the, various scheduling challenges. Let's double click all the way down to the actual data that's creating that's creating these graphs. That's composed of this graph. And in the same way, you can actually start to do co-occurrence analysis too. So I can start to say, show me the co-occurrence of, say, product features with a certain type of design feedback. Here is we're looking for an overlap between this particular label with these sets of labels. Really easy to kind of start to go through and start to do the analysis. The other way, so now we've talked about frequency analysis, but what if you wanted to start doing start to engage with the qualitative data? You can start to group by, say, questions, right? Here are all the questions, here are all the responses. Now I can go through all of the responses, and if I wanted to code some of those responses in a new way, I can just select some of these and say, all right, well, why don't I have a few, maybe I'll create a new label and I say this was a positive response. And now I've coded all of this data together to, coded all of that data with using this one label, right? Or I can have AI summarize some of this responses for me, and I can say, all right, well, I have gotten, 21 responses to this one question. Before I even go and start to code this data, let me just see what is, what AI says about it. And the AI would go through the transcript and say, here are like kind of the patterns that we are seeing across the board. Qualitative feedback, top-level strategies. This here is kind of what we are learning, right? And this is a really good way to engage, to kind of have you and your students and other people just engage with the data at a surface level and try and understand, try and build some empathy with the data before you even start to code the data, right? And it doesn't have to be any question. You can select any kind of I can say show me everything, where we have mentioned all of the goals and names. I have 15 of these notes. Just can you summarize this for me? And the system would go, and then summary, consulting work process. So you can engage both at a surface level using AI. You can engage in kind of from a numbers perspective in terms of kind of co-occurrences, frequency analysis, and then you can actually go and do some deep coding work to try and see, what other patterns that are emerging. One of the things that I really like to do is once you've started to see some patterns, you can select and group those patterns both using labels. Also, you can stitch some of these kind of videos together to start telling a story directly. So I'm going to stitch some of these, people that talked about their goals. I stitch 6, I'll take 7 of these. I'll say this is a video stitch of our participants talking about their goals. And now what the system is going to do is it takes all of those video clips that we have marked together into one kind of big video clip. And this video clip, in this case, this is a video clip, there's some survey. It'll stitch all of that data together into kind of one group. And if you wanted to present it in, say, to the class wanted to present it to you, they can create an MP4. So the idea being, it works with modern technologies. It's an intuitive interface, but it's a full under the hood. It's a fully functional QDA with all of the features that you would need from a QDA tool to teach the analysis, do the analysis yourself.